How much would you have to get paid to live on an island that requires you to carry around a gas mask, given that the local volcano regularly spews clouds of lung-scalding gas? How about a town that's so cold your exhaled breath crystallizes and blows away as icy particles? Whatever the amount, you're thinking there are some that face these conditions as a way of life, and what you or I consider intolerable is for them just a daily routine. The answer is no amount of money. It's snowing today. I already don't like it. Perhaps most interestingly is why these people chose to stay, and there really isn't one simple explanation. Circumstances range from sheer lack of options to sentimentality, or in some cases, the motivation is simply corporate obligation. Whatever the reasons, if YouTube told me to move there, I guess I'd have to. They're like, Simon, you want to still get paid? Off you go to Siberia, boy. Whatever the reasons, the locals have managed to adapt to extreme circumstances, even if doing so meant creating a completely new way of life. The real takeaway is that no matter how bad things get, humans are, above all else, remarkably adaptable. Be it frozen wastelands, scorching deserts, and sometimes even literal lakes of acid, humans have somehow turned it into a home. That's Lake Natron, by the way, a real lake of acid, and we'll get into it. First, though, let's take a look at Witten in Australia, a town that's been removed from maps and is now surrounded on all sides by clearly labelled warning signs. Witten is no longer even open to visitors due to the inherent risks, but not that long ago it was a bustling, prosperous mining town with a peak population of 20,000 residents. Had things gone differently, the town would, in all likelihood, have continued to grow and prosper. The problem was that the mineral being mined was asbestos, and after more than 1,000 miners and members of their family breathed in harmful asbestos fibres, Witten turned into a ghost town almost overnight. And look, if you're not familiar, breathing in asbestos can result in lung scarring, referred to as asbestosis, and by extension, the risk of mesothelioma dramatically increases, which is otherwise known as cancer of the lungs lining. The mine at Witten was shut down in 1966 following the deaths, and in 1978, the state began phasing out the town entirely. But despite the known hazards and locals being aware of the very serious risks, many residents simply refused to leave. These were people that had grown up and lived for 30 years in the Australian wilderness, and it had just become their way of life. Between 1986 and 1992, the state began to demolish empty houses, and the school and police station were officially closed. The local airport followed in 1993, and still some residents remained. In 2006 and 2007, the town was removed from maps, and the power grid was disconnected. In 2008, the town was declared contaminated under the Contaminated Sites Act of 2003, and still some residents remained. The last to leave, Lorraine Thomas, was officially evicted in September 2022 after having lived most of her life in a town where asbestos fibres still contaminate the landscape. Had she not been forcibly evicted, she insists she would have stayed, even if as the only resident in the entire town. Residents of Witten chose to stay because they love the town and community they'd live in. But the reasons for locals staying are much darker in some other hazardous environments. Just before we continue with today's episode, a quick word about our sponsor, Huel. Lined that up smoothly. Most days, I don't have the time or honestly the patience to think about food, especially at lunchtime. I just want something quick. I just want something that works, and that's why I use Huel Black Edition. It is a high-protein, complete meal, 40 grams of protein in there, which is a lot. No artificial sweeteners, and plus carbs, fats, fiber, and 27 vitamins and minerals. Don't want to forget your vitamins and minerals. No weird additives, but it does taste good. Just grab, shake, and drink. It keeps me full, it keeps me energized, and it just tastes good. It's a good tasting drink. It's a good tasting lunch, I should say. It's also vegan, it's gluten-free, it takes about 30 seconds to make. Oh, I've got the bag as well. I think I'm supposed to show that. This big bag. You scoop it out of there, you put it in, and you shake it up. And look on the back there, it's got all of these vitamins and minerals. So if you want to try it, new customers get 15% off with the code SP15 at huel.com/SP15. Again, that's huel.com/SP15, code SP15 for 15% off. And now back to today's video. Agbogbloshie in Ghana was an e-waste recycling facility until recently abandoned, leaving behind a veritable wasteland of old televisions, computers, and other discarded electronic detritus. Given that the processing of the waste had been based around burning the discarded items and recovering valuable components, the environment is heavily contaminated by toxic metals. The situation is so bad that surrounding neighborhoods are concerned about long-term consequences, yet the abandoned facility has become a makeshift community. Some locals chose to move in and scratch together a living, now living daily lives of extracting any remaining valuable components from the e-waste that still remains. The primary treasure is bitcoins. It's not. It's copper. And although authorities have repeatedly warned about the dangers, for some, there are so few options that the meagre benefits outweigh the very real risks. And in the southern district in Manshiat Nasir in Egypt, there's actually a similar situation playing out, only in this case, the 60,000 residents have turned a refuse dump into a thriving community. The southernmost district in Manshiat Nasir was originally established as a refuse facility in 1976 at the base of Makaton Hill. But over time, as more and more foragers gathered to search for salvage, a permanent settlement emerged. Southern Manshiat Nasir is now referred to as Garbage City, and the population is only growing. The community revolves around the processing of Cairo City's waste, with Garbage City residents making their living by recycling about 80% of what Cairo residents throw away. But this isn't to say that Garbage City is in any way welcoming, given that there is no infrastructure, including no running water, no sewers, no electricity. Despite this, the community has survived for generations, and many that now live there were born into recycling refuse as a way of life. Youngsters set off in horse-drawn carts at dawn to collect garbage, and by lunch the deliveries are being sorted and processed, ready to be taken to recycling plants. The conditions in Garbage City are what many would consider intolerable, but it's reported that the residents there have a strong sense of order, discipline, diligence, and take pride in their work. And it's certainly understandable, it's even admirable that the community at Manshiat Nasir exists, and while there are inherent risks, the community does their best to stay safe. Those living in New Delhi, India, on the other hand, don't have much choice about the air they breathe. According to a 2022 survey by the United States-based Health Effects Institute, New Delhi ranks as having the worst air conditions in the world out of 7,000 cities surveyed. I went there a couple of years ago. The air is intense. In New Delhi and the surrounding areas, it's estimated that a shocking 2 million die every year from chronic respiratory disease and asthma, while an additional 2 million are currently suffering from irreversible lung damage. So bad is the situation that the Supreme Court in India commented in 2019 that the situation in Delhi has become worse than hell, and that's a quote, with Court Justice Aaron Mishra commenting that it might be kinder to simply get explosives and kill everyone. Again, somehow that's a quote. The chronically poor air quality is attributed to 41% vehicle emissions, 18% industrial emissions, and 21.5% to just dust. The Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers later disputed these findings, but the Centre for Science and Environment countered by saying that any dispute was due only to the truth being inconvenient, which is a pretty good burn, to be honest. On November the 18th, 2024, Delhi recorded its worst air quality season in history, with a 24-hour period that equated to an air quality index of 491, one level higher than severe. In terms of what's being done about the problem, the National Clean Air Programme, or NCAP, aims to reduce particulate matter pollution by 40% by 2026. This includes stricter vehicle emission standards, promoting cleaner fuels like ethanol, and deploying enforcement teams to industrial sites. It's a similar situation in the Philippines, but to a much more dramatic degree. The Mar Copper mining disaster is the worst in the history of the Philippines, recognized as one of the most devastating mining disasters in the world. In March 1996, on the islands of Marinduque in the Mimaropa region, a drainage tunnel connecting toxic mine waste fractured, allowing 1.6 million cubic meters of contaminated water to surge into the Bark River. The initial surge resulted in a devastating flash flood, all but completely destroying the nearby village of Barangay Hinapulan. 20 other villages were evacuated, water was rendered undrinkable, fish and shrimp were killed, cows, pigs, and other livestock drowned, and entire crops were lost. The river was declared a health hazard, meaning that an entire region had more or less been written off. But despite this, many residents chose to stay simply because abandoning their villages wasn't an option. To this day, thousands still inhabit what is essentially a toxic wasteland, with locals suffering frequent adverse health effects. And the conditions in the Philippines are certainly tragic, but while locals stay due to necessity, in Norilsk in Russia, locals live in a contaminated wasteland out of corporate obligation. Located 180 miles north of the Arctic Circle, Norilsk not only has an average temperature of minus 10 degrees Celsius, average, it's also recognized as one of the most polluted mining towns in the world. Norilsk is based around copper-nickel sulfide deposits, with a significant portion of global industries relying on the output. But since the 30s, when the mines were originally operating, the contamination of heavy metals in the area is beyond anything seen virtually anywhere else on the planet. So extreme is the contamination that mining company Norilsk Nickel Danakil recently shut down one of its factories, the facility having been responsible for producing 350,000 tons of sulfur dioxide annually. Filtration systems were technically in place, but attempts to contain the hazardous waste ultimately proved futile. For evidence of the environmental damage, look at the Danakil River, which recently turned blood red, which isn't a good sign. So shocking was this occurrence that residents quoted Bible passages relating to God turning the Nile into blood. Norilsk first denied that a leak had occurred, but later was forced to admit that a filtration dam had spilled into the river. Current plans are to transfer operations to a more modernized plant in the Murmansk region, which, according to the company, is better equipped to contain pollution. Though Norway has accused the new plants of spewing death clouds across the border, which itself is a serious problem. Meanwhile, around 175,000 residents remain in the freezing, dilapidated town of Norilsk, originally built in 1935 and very much still appearing as a product of the Soviet era. If Norilsk sounds like something akin to a nightmare, the situation in Centralia in Pennsylvania is quite literally the original inspiration for the Silent Hill franchise of horror video games. The small coal mining town opened in 1842 after the Locust Mountain Coal and Iron Company purchased the land and started operations. Who calls their company Locust? Finally, connected to the railroad in 1854, the town remained modestly sized but prosperous, bolstered by an endless need for coal. Things went sour in 1962 when, in an effort to clear out an old landfill, workers were ordered to burn mountains of accumulated trash. Brilliant for the environment. The intense fire jumped to the underground coal seams, though, and has been burning ever since, 63 years on as of 2025. The atmosphere transformed almost immediately into the hazy, misty nightmare recognizable in Silent Hill, and locals began to evacuate soon after. Those that remained, hoping in desperation that the fire would naturally burn out, witnessed as coal deposits combusted, the empty pits that remained weakened the ground and resulted in sinkholes that began to deform the landscape, leaving split roads and dangerously uneven terrain. Over time, Centralia officially became a ghost town, but some die-hard residents do still remain to this very day. The 2013 agreement allows the last 5 residents to remain until their deaths, after which the state will seize their properties and demolish the remnants once and for all. But let's go back to Russia for a moment, as there's an area far worse than Norilsk and Centralia combined, and that would be the infamous Lake Karachay. The lake has been referred to as the most polluted place on Earth, though that may be a bit hyperbolic considering some of the other places still coming up. The small natural lake was a dumping ground for the Soviet-era Marinduque nuclear weapons laboratory and fuel processing plant, and that alone would have been enough to leave the area dangerous. But due to a string of disasters at the facility, the lake and the surrounding area became highly contaminated with radioactive waste. The bad situation was transformed into a complete disaster when, in the 1960s, the lake began to dry out. This effectively removed whatever natural insulation had existed, and the dry lake bed was picked up by winds and carried, delivering irreversible radiation poisoning to hundreds of thousands over several years. Residents in the villages and communities along the Taha River suffered the worst of it, though doctors were not permitted to diagnose radiation poisoning since the facility was a state secret. Brilliant. As of today, the area around the lake is referred to as the East Ural Radioactive Trace, and 270,000 residents were officially relocated. However, some residents returned to their homes in the less contaminated areas, ignoring strong warnings from authorities. The health of these individuals is regularly monitored to this day, with it being reported that many suffer from reproductive problems. And sticking with radioactive catastrophes, you knew it would be on this list, and here it is, the disaster at Chernobyl in Ukraine. There's not much we can say about Chernobyl that hasn't already been said, except perhaps for adding the context that, despite what you may have heard, people do presently still live in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. This is another one I've been to, by the way. As with Lake Karachay, a group of residents referred to as self-settlers returned to their homes in some of the surrounding areas, despite it officially being illegal. Self-settlers are generally ex-residents that simply wanted to return to their homes, and the government has unofficially decided to turn a blind eye. The only hard rule enforced is that self-settlers do not take children with them, and it seems that this rule is being followed. Apart from the self-settlers, thousands of workers are also present within the exclusion zone, tasked with security and ongoing radiation control. These groups cycle out every 3 months, and their health is constantly monitored. So, it's illegal to inhabit the Chernobyl exclusion zone, but in stark contrast, the Japanese government is actively making an effort to gradually reintroduce residents to the disaster zone at Fukushima. The accident occurred at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Okuma, directly relating to the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. The electrical grid failed, and almost all of the power plant's backup energy sources were damaged, meaning that cores could no longer be properly cooled, and radioactive contaminants were released into the surrounding environment. The accident was rated as a 7 severity, the worst possible on on the International Nuclear Event Scale by the Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency. This means that the Fukushima incident is regarded as equivalent to the Chernobyl disaster, which paints a very clear picture of just how bad the situation is. What's interesting is the manner in which the Japanese government is dealing with the tragedy. It's very different to how Chernobyl was handled and is still being handled. Cleanup efforts certainly exist in Ukraine, but there has been no effort to reintroduce residents, with the self-settlers returning completely of their own accord. In Japan, meanwhile, the zones around the disaster are being continually updated, giving a clear idea of how the contamination is progressing. The immediate area around the disaster was initially labelled as the exclusion zone, but has since been updated to the difficult-to-return zone. The restricted residence zone does not allow permanent residents, but does allow day visits and some limited businesses. The evacuation order cancellation preparation zone, as the name suggests, is where businesses are allowed to operate and lodging is permitted, with preparations currently underway to completely lift all restrictions. Despite efforts by the government, very few have chosen to permanently live anywhere near Fukushima, regardless of effort, which isn't exactly surprising. Now, at this point, we can all probably agree that some of the worst living conditions are a result of humanity itself, be it due to pollution or the fallout of a catastrophic disaster. But it certainly isn't always the case that humans need to be involved for the presence of incredibly hazardous environments with Mother Nature perfectly capable of being uninviting. Perfect example is the Dead Sea. Oh, another one I've been to, which didn't get its name because it's lovely to swim in. It is not. It really hurts your eyes, even just a little splash. Due to the extreme salt content of the Dead Sea, about 10 times saltier than any other ocean, the water is toxic if swallowed, potentially resulting in electrolyte shock, which in turn leads to seizures, brain damage, even cardiac arrest. You can technically swim in the water, although doing so for more than 15 to 20 minutes is strongly discouraged. If you're brave and do decide to swim, getting any water in your eyes will cause painful stinging, but it is nothing in comparison to getting the water into an open wound, which is described as excruciating. Even if you don't decide to swim, the shoreline itself is extremely dangerous, with countless sinkholes existing due to the presence of salt deposits dissolving beneath the surface. Despite all of this, the Dead Sea is still a popular tourist attraction, and around 1.5 million live in the immediate vicinity. Now, as unpleasant as it sounds, the Dead Sea is a holiday resort in comparison to some of the other naturally hazardous environments, with the Danakil Depression sounding like something akin to hell on Earth. Occupying an area of approximately 200 by 50 kilometers in the Afar region of Ethiopia, the valley is the third lowest lying region of Africa. Although it's not the unusual altitude itself that makes the valley so inhospitable, but rather the condition of the Earth's crust in the area. The depression is believed to have initially formed around 11 million years ago, with the first stages of the depression occurring due to a counterclockwise rotation of the Danakil microplate. The geological activity gradually resulted in a thinning of the crust, in turn resulting in frequent localized earthquakes. You can also expect extreme heat, potentially fatal clouds of volcanic gases, widespread and easy to fall into acidic pools, and for all this to be complemented by treacherous and remote terrain. Logically, one would assume that no one lives anywhere near what is one of the most inhospitable natural environments on Earth, but guess again. The semi-nomadic Afar people inhabit the area and have done so for centuries. The community is recognized first and foremost for their resilience to some of the harshest environments on the planet, as well as for salt mining using traditional hand-carved tools. Now, we give all due respect to the Afar community, though even they may think twice about living anywhere near Lake Natron in Tanzania. Located in the Ngorongoro district of the Arusha region, Lake Natron is the result of mineral-rich hot springs, and while shallow, the lake runs for around 57 kilometers with a width of 22. The first characteristic that will put you off is the lake's average temperature, which is generally above 40 degrees Celsius and gets as high as 60. If that's not enough, consider the extremely high content of sodium carbonate decahydrate, otherwise known as natron, and sodium sesquicarbonate dihydrate. If you don't know what that means, it translates to the water being a caustic alkaline brine, which translates to anything that isn't cooked is going to be dead regardless, and its corpse is ultimately going to be calcified into a mummy. Brilliant. Thankfully, there have been no confirmed deaths relating to the lake, though in 2017, a helicopter crashed directly in the water. The film crew on board survived, but suffered severe alkaline burns to their skin and eyes. A helicopter crash and that that's a bad day. The semi-nomadic Maasai people chose to live near Lake Natron, largely avoiding the dangers while grazing their livestock on grassy plains. Now, if you were to think of an environment worse than a lake that will literally burn you and calcify your corpse, you may settle on the awe-inspiring destructive potential of an active volcano. As it turns out, there is a gobsmacking number of people that live in the immediate area of volcanoes that are still considered to be active, with the conditions on Miyakajima Island in particular being especially disturbing. But let's start off with Mount Fuji, a stratovolcano located on the island of Honshu. Mount Fuji is the highest mountain in Japan, standing 3.7 kilometers tall, and is known for being exceptionally symmetrical and particularly majestic when covered in snow for 5 months of the year. It also happens to be an active volcano, with the last eruption occurring between 1707 and 1708, referred to as the Helens eruption. The devastating event was characterized by immense ashfall and landslides, which in turn resulted in widespread famine. But surely, given that around 1 million people live within a 30-kilometer radius of the mountain, it can no longer be at risk of eruption. Right? Well, as of right now, pressure is currently building in the magma chamber, and although once considered dormant, there is real risk of Fuji erupting again. It's unlikely today that there would be anywhere near the damage that it could do in the 1700s, but similar ashfall would be incredibly hazardous and cause widespread disaster. And then there's Mount Vesuvius in the Gulf of Naples, which needs no introduction, standing as testimony to what can happen when residents aren't prepared for a disaster. The most commonly referred to disaster, of course, is Pompeii, but the 79 CE eruption was likewise responsible for destroying the lesser-mentioned Herculaneum, Oplontis, Stabai, and many other settlements. More than 1,000 died on that occasion, but today an eruption would be immeasurably worse, given that 3 million people live within the danger zone, including 1 million that live directly on the volcano's slopes. Those on the slopes live in the high-risk red zone, though do so willingly despite the known risks. Once again, not only is the volcano at risk of erupting, in the case of Vesuvius, it's near the top of the list of most likely to erupt. Visitors and locals even regularly see activity such as rising plumes of smoke, but no, nearby residents haven't lost their mind. The volcano is monitored 24 hours a day, and if there was any indication that a full-blown eruption was imminent, there are clearly planned evacuation strategies in place. Homes would certainly be destroyed, but a loss of life is considered unlikely. Now, those living near Vesuvius must take comfort in the fact that the last eruption was long enough ago to be considered ancient, the same of which can't be said for Mount St. Helens in the Pacific Northwest region of America. The last eruption of the still active volcano was May the 18th, 1980, resulting in 57 deaths, the loss of 200 homes, the destruction of 47 bridges, the scorching of 24 kilometers of railways, and 298 kilometers of highway. The eruption was accompanied by a 5.1 magnitude earthquake, as well as devastating landslides and ashfall, which significantly impacted the surrounding ecosystem. Now, if you're still somehow keen on living near Mount St. Helens, volcanic activity visibly continued until 2008, after which it finally subsided. Thankfully, in this case, no one rushed to rebuild their home in the vicinity of the volcano, with Cougar, Washington being the nearest community, about 18 kilometers away. Mount St. Helens is likewise being monitored, and another eruption is expected at some point. However, the configuration of the volcano has changed since the previous eruption, with the configuration going from having a weakened flank to a deep crater. So, future eruptions will vent upwards and are less likely to cause the widespread damage of the 1980 disaster. Even still, residents in Cougar are technically still in the danger zone and have evacuation plans ready. Now, you'll probably agree that not rebuilding homes and repopulating the area around Mount St. Helens was the right call. So imagine instead making the decision to not just live near an active volcano, but to make your living mining sulfur directly from volcanic craters. The Ijen volcano complex is a group of composite volcanoes located on the border in East Java, Indonesia, recognized for its unusual blue fire, acidic crater lakes, and its locals that earn their living harvesting sulfur. Laborers make around $13 a day for their trouble, which is actually a good wage considering the local cost of living. But the job still is, of course, extremely dangerous, especially given that once extracted, chunks of sulfur still have to be manually carried in baskets for 3 kilometers to Pal Tuding Valley for processing. Yes, the volcano is a constant risk of eruption, and should it blow, so it's expected that the event would be explosive and that anyone in the vicinity would be likely killed instantly. Ijen is continuously monitored by the Center for Volcanology and Geological Hazard Mitigation, and a quick glance at reports is more than a little alarming. Several small explosive events were reported in 2002, followed by small earthquakes in 2003, plus water disturbance due to volcanic gases as recently as 2012. Now, the one thing the miners at Ijen could be thankful for is that although there is volcanic activity, it's likely minor. This certainly isn't the case for Mount Kilauea in Hawaii. It's a 250,000-year-old volcano that has been by far the most active since the island was settled. The most recent eruption occurred in December 2024, producing lava fountains and flows that continued into this year. The resulting destruction has been considerable, and there's no sign that Mount Kilauea is going to turn dormant anytime soon. Going back just a few years, a pit crater within Kilauea hosted a lava lake that erupted almost continuously between 1983 and 2018, causing severe property damage. The town's Kalapana and Kemu were near completely destroyed, and a once popular black sand beach was all but erased. Following that event, in May 2018, volcanic activity moved from the summit of the volcano to the lower Puna district, with 2 new vents opening up and spewing lava. This unexpected shift in the danger zone destroyed 716 dwellings, including the communities of Kapoho, Vacation Land Hawaii, and most of the Kapoho beach lots. The good news is that loss of life in Hawaii due to eruptions is rare, given how aware the community is of the dangers and thanks to diligent monitoring services. Even still, tens of thousands of residents are at constant risk. Far worse than Mount Vesuvius, Mount Helen, and Mount Kilauea combined is Mount Pelee, located on the island of Martinique in the Eastern Caribbean. Or at least, the 1902 eruption of Mount Pelee is widely recognized as one of, if not the most horrific volcanic eruption in history. The 1902 events were well recorded, recounting that activity began on April the 23rd, kicking off as a series of eruptions at the summit. Subsiding for a few days, more eruptions occurred a few days later, this time even more violent, and with ash ejections heavy enough to turn broad daylight into near-complete darkness. It was May the 5th when mud flows began to sweep into settlements, killing 150 European settlers. Magmatic eruptions followed soon after, and a final enormous eruption occurred on May the 8th, resulting in a searing gas cloud or pyroclastic surge that killed virtually everyone in the town of Saint-Pierre. More than 30,000 were all literally cooked alive, save for a handful of survivors that were in cellars and other protected locations. And yes, the island of Martinique is populated today, with several major settlements and villages amounting to a total population of more than 250,000 people. The volcano is at risk of further eruptions, with the last serious activity recorded in 1970. Incredibly alarmingly, renewed activity was detected this year, including increased seismic anomalies and a deformation of the volcano itself. Current residents on Martinique, at least, aren't required to carry around gas masks on a 24-hour basis due to a constant fear of asphyxiation, which brings us to perhaps the most extreme example of living in the vicinity of a volcano in the world, the Japanese island of Miyakajima. The island is notorious for Mount Oyama, an active volcano noted for releasing toxic sulfuric gas on occasions where the emissions are too high. The population is alerted by an air raid alarm system indicating that it's time to put on a gas mask or some of the potentially very serious consequences. For context, a major eruption of Mount Oyama occurred in 2000, resulting in an evacuation of the entire island. Residents were only allowed to return in 2005, but under the strict condition that carrying a gas mask be a requirement for every individual on the island. If that's not unnerving enough, there is no official report as to how many times gas masks have had to be worn, but the siren has been sounded on multiple occasions. Despite the frankly insane risks, the island is fairly popular, supporting a permanent population of 2,800 people. Miyakajima is known for its fishing, birdwatching, and picturesque beauty, and indications are that although not as many as there once were, thousands of tourists still travel there annually. So living in actively hazardous regions is certainly a reality, be it out of desperation, due to corporate obligation, or out of cultural ties to the land. And then there are the regions that most would avoid at all cost, yet locals seem to stay for no other reason than they've grown accustomed to the harsh conditions. Let's go back to Russia and take a look at Oymyakon, and if you thought minus 10 degrees in Norilsk was difficult to handle, well, it ain't even close to what is recognized as the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth. Oymyakon was originally established during World War II as part of the Alaska-Siberian air route, serving the purpose of ferrying aircrafts to the eastern front. This service was eventually no longer needed, and those residing in the town transitioned to fur trading trading and ice fishing. If fur trading is profitable enough to justify the temperatures is very much up for debate, given that it can plummet to lows of an absolutely eye-watering minus 70 Celsius. Now, it isn't that cold all year round, and during some months it can even hover above freezing. Lovely. Basically balmy weather. But minus 40 to 50 degrees isn't unusual, and schools even officially close if it gets colder than minus 55, which is actually quite common. Not too surprisingly, the population of Oymyakon has been dropping steadily to around just 800 from a peak of 2,500. Those that do stay talk about getting used to it and ultimately embrace the extreme conditions instead of trying to minimize them, though the stories of breath freezing into crystals, clothes crunching within seconds of being outdoors, and eyelashes turning into icicles are more than enough to put off most visitors. Makes me wonder if there are any visitors. A similar situation exists in Ittoqqortoormiit, and although conditions aren't as cold as they are in Oymyakon, with the average being 6 degrees Celsius, the difference here is that there is no way in or out of town, not unless you're taking a helicopter or a dog sled across frozen wastelands. And if you do decide to leave, make sure you're skilled with that dog sled, because the nearest inhabited area is 800 kilometers by land across frozen, virtually featureless landscape. Ittoqqortoormiit is recognized as one of the most isolated settlements in the world, having been founded in 1925 by Danish polar explorer Enjar Mikkelsen, along with around 80 Inuit settlers. Denmark had a growing interest in Greenland at the time, and efforts were made to establish outposts that took advantage of the bountiful hunting opportunities. The settlers soon thrived on the abundant seals, walruses, and polar bears in the region. The population has never grown beyond around 345 as of 2020. If you can get past the isolation and extreme lack of entertainment options, Ittoqqortoormiit is reportedly actually rather nice, and travel there is available via Air Greenland. The guest house there was even featured in Hotels.com in 2018, though it isn't clear how many, if any, people took up the offer. If Ittoqqortoormiit sounds a bit too inviting for you, though, you can instead turn your attention to Villa Las Estrellas in Antarctica, which is everything that Ittoqqortoormiit is, but more isolated, colder, and with fewer residents. Founded in April 1984, Villa Las Estrellas, or the Hamlet of Stars, is one of 2 permanent settlements on King George Island within the Chilean Antarctic Territory. Officially, the little settlement serves as much-needed support for the Chilean research and military outposts in the area. The airport, medical facilities, and communication network are all key, and without it, many nearby operations couldn't function. As of 2020, there are 80 permanent residents, plus around 50 researchers and scientists that stay on a rotational basis. If you're keen on visiting, expect average temperatures of around 2 degrees Celsius, and you hopefully enjoy basketball or netball, because that's as much as you're going to get in terms of entertainment. Competing for most isolated, freezing, permanent settlements in the world is Longyearbyen in Norway, one of the most northern places in the world. The location is so far north that it experienced periods referred to as midnight sun and polar night, translating to a period between around April 20th and August 23rd, during which the sun remains above the horizon continuously. Conversely, between October 26th to February 15th, the sun never rises, creating a period of constant night. If this brings to mind the vampiric comic series later turned into a movie, 30 Days of Night, you're on the right track. That gruesome story was set in Barrow, Alaska, which experiences similar elongated day and night periods. Longyearbyen, otherwise known as Longyeartown after John Munro Longyear, was established by the Arctic Coal Company in 1906. The town was almost entirely destroyed by the German Kriegsmarine on the 8th of September 1943, but was rebuilt only for the majority of the mining operations to move to Siakruva during the 1990s. Following this, the population dropped significantly, with there being around 1,000 residents there today. The town has, however, seen a significant increase in activity, with new institutes moving in, primarily for research purposes. The University Centre, Global Seed Vault, Satellite Station, Airport, church, a dedicated grocery store, and new additions. And as far as being this far north is concerned, Longyearbyen is actually somewhat bustling. Sticking with Norway, let's go to Hustadvika, famous for being one of the most notoriously dangerous bays in the world. A 19-kilometer or 10 nautical mile stretch along the coastline of the Hustadvika municipality is a primary shipping route, but natural conditions make traversing the area of ocean something akin to a game of Russian roulette. Most of the rest of the Norwegian coastline is sheltered from severe weather by islands, but for this brief section, there is nothing between ships and the open ocean. Add to this shallow, refilled waters, and you've got a bit of a recipe for disaster. There is no official count of how many ships have been wrecked in the area, but it is thought to be dozens at the least, with reports of sunken Dutch merchant ships going back 300 years. The most recent incident occurred in in 2019 when the cruise ship Viking Sky was stranded during harsh weather. The 1,300 passengers were airlifted to safety in an incredibly dangerous mission, during which a helicopter faced wind speeds of up to 85 kilometers an hour. Hustopeka isn't necessarily treacherous for residents in the bay, but the locals do have to deal with particularly harsh weather as just a part of life. The nearby Atlantic Ocean road is often closed for this very reason, with it known that there is a very real risk of cars being swept away by fierce waves. Apart from this, the bay actually looks really nice. Residents of Hustopeka also have their privacy and open space, something residents at Whittier in Alaska have learned to live without. Located at the head of the Passage Canal and acting as a port for the Alaska Marine Highway, Whittier is also referred to as the city under one roof. The story of Whittier goes back to World War II, when the United States founded Camp Sullivan as part of a route for U.S. soldiers to enter into Alaska. Buckner Building, later named to Begich Towers, was completed in 1953, and the 14-story Hodge Building in 1957, containing 150 apartments. The port was devastated by the Good Friday earthquake in 1964, with 13-meter tsunamis causing an estimated $100 million in damages. That's terrifying. Following this, the port was abandoned as an army facility, and Whittier emerged as a port of call for cruise ships, servicing vessels traveling between Anchorage and Vancouver. Begich Towers became a public building for major institutes and commercial services, while Hodge Building offered accommodation. Notably, and justifying the City Under One Roof title, both buildings and the Whittier School are all connected via underground tunnels, allowing life to continue even during the alarmingly frequent bad weather. Every one of the residents also resides in a single location, Hodge Building, with there literally being no other options. Most fascinating of all is that according to census data, the population of Whittier recently increased, going from 220 to around 270. This would mean that Hodge Building is near maximum capacity, though chances are no new developments are going to be starting anytime soon. Taking the crown for most isolated community in the world, beating all those mentioned before, we have Tristan da Cunha, more commonly known simply as Tristan. The island is the remotest location that currently supports a permanent population, though in this case we're talking about just 250 people, all of which live there due only to having British Overseas Territories citizenship. The location is part of a remote collection of volcanic islands in the South Atlantic Ocean, making up an area of around 98 square kilometers. Included are the wildlife reserves of Gough Island and the aptly named Inaccessible Island, as well as nearby Nightingale Island, which is completely uninhabited. Unlike the other isolated places in today's video, there is almost no way to get to Tristan. No airstrip or airports are present, leaving only a 6-day journey from a port at Cape Town in South Africa as your only route. This is exactly why the island residents are almost entirely South Africans, all of which operate or contribute in some way to a critical weather station on Gough Island. The little group of islands does have a surprisingly long and rich history, but the location today is barely acknowledged and almost never mentioned, other than being declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1995. Which is nice. The water around the island, stretching for 687,247 square kilometers, has also been declared a marine protection zone. If you care to visit, you can expect entertainment options such as hiking, fishing, or listening to the radio. Beyond that, the small community completely embraces having all but been forgotten by the world at large. On the other hand, if all of that cold and isolation is a bit too much for you, head on over to Death Valley in the USA, because who isn't attracted to a place that literally has death in its name? You'll find Death Valley in eastern California in the northern Mojave Desert, and it won't take you long to figure out why the highest point in the United States got its ominous title. On July the 10th, 1913, the United States Weather Bureau recorded a temperature of 56.7 degrees Celsius in the aptly named Furnace Creek, which is the highest ambient air temperature ever recorded in history. Death Valley makes up most of the Death Valley National Park, which is a primary feature of the larger Mojave and Colorado Deserts Biosphere Reserve. The 7,800 square kilometer area officially got its name, not from the blistering heat, but because pioneers crossed the area in 1849, attempting to find a shortcut to the goldfields of California. Interestingly, only one of the pioneers died, but all in the group were certain that they would follow, and their enthusiastic warnings were taken to heart. Apart from being almost inconceivably hot, Death Valley is also known for being unbearably dry, receiving almost no precipitation due to its geographical location in the rain shadow of the Sierra Nevada and Panamint Range. Despite all this, Death Valley is home to the Timbisha Native Americans, previously known as the Panamint Shoshone, who have resided there for at least a millennium. Conditions are similar in Cooper Bay, South Australia, where average annual temperatures are upwards of 30 degrees Celsius, with the hottest months, January and February, often hitting upwards of 40. So hot is the town that one of its most recognizable characteristics is dugouts or dwellings that are located beneath the surface in an effort to escape the blistering heat. The town's homes, shops, and churches are dug into the sandstone bedrock, and even then some buildings get uncomfortably hot. As with the others on this list, the reason people choose to live there is the mining opportunities, and in this case we're talking about opals. Following World War I, many veterans sought jobs in mining and were willing to put up with extreme conditions. This marked the initial boom of cubopedy, which continued after World War II, when additional veterans, immigrants, and refugees wanted profitable work and weren't put off by having to live underground. Today, cubopedy is still very much an active mining region, supporting a population of around 2,500. The Olympic Australis, an opal measuring 280 by 120 by 115 millimeters and weighing 17,000 carats, was uncovered in the region in 1997 and is officially valued at 2.5 million Australian dollars. Cubopedy isn't the only location in the world featuring underground residences, though. Locals in Matmata in Tunisia likewise head underground to escape the unbearable heat. What's most fascinating is that the town was nothing more than myth until 1969, until which it was believed that only nomadic tribes existed in the area. The town was only officially acknowledged after heavy rains caused many dwellings to collapse, forcing locals to seek help from a nearby town. After the rescue effort, above-ground homes were established to avoid further emergencies, but the majority of residents willingly returned to their underground dwellings. If the dwellings in Matmata look familiar, that's because you've seen them before in more than one Star Wars movie. Luke Skywalker and his aunt and uncle lived in such a dwelling, or should we say, rather, they lived on Tatooine. The same location was used for the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. Today, Matmata survives almost entirely on tourism, thanks to Star Wars making it a superfan hotspot. If you're planning to visit, expect average temperatures that peak at close to 40 degrees Celsius. Residents of cubopedy and Matmata have adapted well to their extreme surroundings, but in some cases, similar adaptation just isn't possible. In the Gobi Desert in China and Mongolia, the biggest difference is the area the desert covers, with even Death Valley being minuscule in comparison. The Gobi Desert occupies more than 1.2 million square kilometers, made up mostly of scorched, bare rock that resists any attempt at underground shelters. There's another remarkable difference that separates Gobi from the other deserts, which is that despite what you may be imagining, the temperatures are often freezing cold. The Gobi Desert gets most of its moisture from snow, thanks to the winter conditions blown in from the Siberian steppes. These winter winds often push temperatures down to minus 40 degrees Celsius, meaning that this is a desert that stands shoulder to shoulder with some of the coldest conditions at the poles. Don't let that cold fool you too much, though. However, since it does get hot in the summer, even if the 45 degrees Celsius peaks fall short of the conditions in Death Valley. Adding to the inherent dangers, the extreme temperature changes can occur in just a 24-hour period. This translates to your balmy daytime almost instantly transforming into a freezing nighttime before you've even had time to construct an appropriate shelter. Emphasizing just how severe the Gobi Desert area is, during the 2021 Guangzhou Ultramarathon, 21 runners died of hypothermia due to an abrupt change in climate. Freezing rain, gale-force winds, and hail suddenly swept in, and those in the most difficult exposed terrain just perished before rescue teams could arrive. The Gobi Desert is a death sentence for unprepared marathon runners, but a permanent home for nomadic Mongols. The mysterious community is known for herding sheep, goats, and horses. And as extreme as the Gobi Desert is, it at least gets some moisture, even if via snow. The Atacama Desert in Chile is one of the very few deserts with the dubious accolade of being a fog desert, meaning that virtually all the moisture in the region comes via fog. Close to 0% comes via actual precipitation, making the Atacama Desert the driest place on Earth. So dry is the region that it's used to simulate expeditions to Mars, and I mean, that kind of says it all, doesn't it? On average, the rainfall is 15 millimeters for the year, but this doesn't really properly put into context that some areas just have never received any rain, period, in the entire history that humans have been monitoring the region. In some other areas, a single drop of rain wasn't recorded for the entirety of the time between 1570 and 1971. The Atacama Desert occupies a strip of 1,600 kilometers, and in that area, the population is 250,000 people, with clustered communities centered around mining towns, coastal settlements, and the oasis town of San Pedro de Atacama, with a population of 2,500. And there's no doubt that life in the Atacama is dry, but things can always be worse. worse, such as, for example, if you also added a layer of salt that coats the entire landscape. Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia is the largest salt flat in the world, otherwise known as the remnants of a series of lakes that evaporated around 40,000 years ago. Left behind is a few meters of salt crust spread over around 10,000 square kilometers, and at an altitude of 3,656 meters. Many consider the conditions here far worse than even the driest deserts in the world. What you'll encounter is an unnervingly flat, salt-encrusted plain as far as the eye can see, meaning it's all but inevitable that you'll soon feel crust clinging to your skin and will soon taste nothing but salt as the wind kicks dust into your face. On the other hand, as unpleasant as the environment is, it's also a virtual goldmine of resources. Below the meters of salt is trapped brine, and in one specific area, referred to as the Lithium Triangle, excavators find rich deposits of sodium, potassium, lithium, magnesium, and borax. As such, it's reported that over $100 million was invested in the mining operations during the 80s and 90s, but the operations were shut down due to strong resistance from the local Bolivian government. As it stands, the government is opposed to exploitation by foreign corporations and is investing in its own localized mining solutions. And a remote salt flat is hellish for most, so let's instead head to the other extreme, where moisture isn't just abundant, it is a key part of the local ecosystem. The Amazon rainforest is a hot topic of controversy for one reason or another, but as beautiful as it is, and as essential as it is for global ecology, it's all but guaranteed you wouldn't want to actually live there. At least, certainly not in the densest area, as stunning as they are to observe from a distance. The Amazon basin occupies 7 million square kilometers, of which 6 million are covered by a rainforest bionetwork. Included is an estimated 390 billion trees, in which 16,000 different species reside. The central Amazon River, meanwhile, snakes from one end of the region to the other, made up of over 1,100 tributaries, 17 of which are over 1,500 kilometers long. Of the 16,000 species present in the Amazon basin, the jaguar, golden poison dart frog, and Brazilian wandering spider are the most dangerous, though they really are the least of your worries. What you should really worry about is the mosquitoes and assassin bugs, which will potentially end your life before you even realize something's bitten you. If the mosquitoes aren't concerning enough, a number of uncontacted, voluntarily isolating tribes are fiercely territorial and are known to aggressively defend against trespassers. This includes the Awa, Mashko-Piru, Kawahiva, and Pripkuro, all of which have taken lives. Now, the Amazon rainforest receives an average of 2,323 millimeters of rain annually, which is more than enough to flood most other regions, yet this place pales in comparison to More Sinram, located in the East Karachay Hills district of northeastern India. Replace the Amazon's few feet of rainfall with 26,000 millimeters, and you're starting to get the picture. The town is officially in the Guinness Book of Records for receiving 1,003.6 millimeters in a 24-hour period. That was June 2022, meaning that almost half of the Amazon's annual average rainfall fell in a single day. The local population deals with landslides, flash floods, and constantly damaged infrastructure is just a part of daily life, with reports saying that residents often spend months at a time simply waiting out rainfall as schools stay closed and outdoor labor is impossible. Despite the challenges, the area is also one of the most lush and beautiful in all of India, and locals have deep cultural and ancestral ties to the land. Grass is used to soundproof huts, and full-body rain covers called knups are designed from bamboo. Local industries such as betel nut and pepper largely benefit from the almost endless rainfall. Unexpected flooding is likewise a problem for the residents at Tonle Sap, also known as the Great Lake, or the largest freshwater body in Cambodia, Southeast Asia. The residents living here deal with unexpected influxes of water as an almost weekly occurrence, given that the lake, belonging to the Mekong River system, has an incredibly complicated hydrology. It's often impossible to predict when and how an influx will occur, meaning that periodic flooding is not just inevitable, it's often also extremely dangerous. This gave rise to the name Floating Village, named after the entire community being built on floating platforms, including houses, markets, and countless community centers. It's all in an effort to cope with otherwise unmanageable conditions, and despite the obvious dangers, the community is known to be incredibly productive. Local industry is focused on the fisheries that are crucial to the entire region, and many nearby towns rely on the fishing that occurs at Tonle Sap. One of the main concerns of Tonle Sap is the hydro-powered dams constructed upstream, which disrupt flood pulses and create increasingly erratic water flow. Contamination is also becoming a major concern, outweighing even the dangers of being unexpectedly swept away. Combine the density of the Amazon rainforest, the flash floods of Tonle Sap, and a healthy dose of death by tiger, and well, now you have the conditions of the Sundarbans in the Ganges Delta, located in the Bay of Bengal in Bangladesh. Make no mistake, The Sundarbans mangrove forest is stunningly beautiful, occupying 10,000 square kilometers and standing as the largest mangrove forest in the world. But the conditions that created this forest are intolerable for most, with the 55% forest and 34% wetlands coming about due to regular monsoon flooding. The countless tidal rivers, creeks, and canals are all only possible due to extremely wet conditions, and this comes with enormous risk. Cyclone Sida in 2007 resulted in around 4,000 deaths, while Cyclone Amphan in 2020 was better in terms of fatalities due to an early warning system, but around 5 million people were still displaced and hundreds of thousands lost their livelihoods. You could perhaps get over the extreme weather conditions, but even then, you'll still have to contend with the other serious problem: wild tigers. There are estimated to be just 125 tigers in the Bangladesh portion of the Sundarbans, but the animals are still responsible for around 20 to 50 deaths annually, taking reports between 2001 and 2020 into account. Regardless, as of a recent census, approximately 12 million live in and around the mangrove forest, 4.5 million in India and 7.4 million in Bangladeshi suburbs. Now, moving off the coast of India, near the Bay of Bengal and part of the Andaman Islands, we now have the oft-talked about and highly controversial North Sentinel Island. The 8-kilometer long and 7-kilometer wide island is mostly known for the Sentinelese tribe that voluntarily isolates there, notorious for forcefully and often fatally protecting their territory. The island falls under the Andaman and Nicobar Islands Protection of Aboriginal Tribes Regulation of 1956 and is regularly patrolled by the Indian Navy. As far as living conditions are concerned, the island is completely isolated and subject to the same weather that turned the Sundarbans into the mangrove forest that it is today. Though the Sentinelese have survived there for around 50,000 years, though so little is known about them, it's unclear how they've adapted to the conditions. As for the history of the islands, it's far longer and more complicated than most assume, with many instances of both peaceful and hostile contact made with the locals. Reports of sightings go back to 1771 and 1867, with the first real attempt to make contact in 1880. Government administrator Maurice Vidal Portman made contact in 1880, though rather tragically, an elderly couple died from sickness after being taken to Port Blair. The couple's 4 children were sent back to the island with gifts. After various other incidents, including friendly contact in the 80s, the first official attempt to form a peaceful relationship was made in 1991 by a director of the Anthropological Survey of India, Trilanath Pandit. The tribe repeatedly warned Pandit about staying too long, and his visit stopped in 1997. Following this, the tribe turned relentlessly hostile following the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake. The fishing grounds frequented by the tribe were irreversibly disturbed, but the locals seem to have adapted. However, the demeanor of the tribe turned hostile and has remained hostile ever since. The tribe shot arrows at a low-flying helicopter sent to check in on them after the earthquake, and in 2006, 2 fishermen that accidentally ran ashore were killed. In 2018, Christian missionary 26-year-old John Allen Chow attempted to contact the tribe on 3 occasions, bribing fishermen to take him to the shores. Allegedly encouraged to visit by Missouri-based All Nations, Chow was killed on his 3rd visit. Constant flooding and monsoons can certainly be a disadvantage, so let's trade flooding for altitude, bringing up La Rinconada, Peru. The highest settlement in the world, La Rinconada is 5,100 meters above sea level, making altitude sickness just a part of daily life. Despite this, the population is a healthy 60,000, having peaked between 2001 and 2009. The reason for an influx, no prizes for guessing, is once again mining, in this case for gold. The town was established due to an existing prospector camp and a massive increase of 235% in the price of gold during that same period, which resulted in a massive influx of new residents. Living in a remote, rustic town and searching for gold may sound appealing to an extent, but it's probably best to also mention the other name of the town, La Ciudad Sin Ley de Peru, or the lawless city of Peru. The nickname is well-deserved given that the promise of easy money doesn't always bring in the most savory characters, and there's an excessively high murder rate and sex trafficking is common, which I suppose are negatives if you're not already put off by the altitude sickness. If you like altitude, but not so much altitude sickness, your other option is Centinel de las Bodegas in the province of Cadiz in Spain. The small town, with a population of around 3,000 permanent residents, occupies a narrow gorge along the Rio Treo River, and so limited is space that many dwellings are built directly into the rock walls. Dwellings are characteristically claustrophobic, and the village's major characteristics are imposing rock surfaces and inclined walkways. Despite the limitations, the town is actually rather pleasant, and perhaps perhaps one of the most appealing on this list. The rich history, stretching back thousands of years, combined with the unique dwellings, brings in tourists by the thousands. Though actually living in Sentinel de las Bodegas is a bit of a daunting prospect, especially given the geography, the majority of which is made up of dangerously steep hills and stairs. Combine this with the complete lack of accessibility other than by foot and how slick the inclines get during the rainy season, it's probably best to visit and not live in a village built in a river gorge. Other than pollution, isolation, and extreme conditions, there are other reasons to avoid particular locations, namely psychological ones. We're talking about locations that are allegedly haunted, and whether you believe in such things or not, some of these locations are undeniably rather unsettling, even if not actually inhabited by ghost schools or goblins. Starting off with an area rumored to be haunted most likely as a means to attract tourists, the former mining town of Goldfield, Arizona is considered a living ghost town. Goldfield was once a bustling mining town boasting 3 saloons, a boarding house, a general store, blacksmith, and even a brewery and a schoolhouse. But right when it seemed like the town would blossom into a full-grown city, the worst thing that could happen to any gold rush town occurred. The vein ran dry. This was in the 1890s, and it wasn't long before Goldfield gradually emptied of residents. Several attempts were made to reignite the mine, but all failed, and what remains today is a tourist attraction simply named Goldfield Ghost Town. Around 200 permanent residents occupy the town today, and a fair amount has been done to refurbish and offer amenities to tourists. Rumors and legends say that the town is, of course, crawling with ghosts, with some going so far as to call it the most haunted location in Arizona. If ghosts enjoy tourist attractions, that's a matter of opinion. Edinburgh, the capital city of Scotland, has a similar ghostly reputation, and likewise residents lean into the spooky stories as a means to stimulate tourism. Much of Edinburgh is actually pretty charming, and you'd be hard-pressed to feel even a little bit creeped out here. But take the ghost tours and explore some of the forgotten corners and shady alcoves, and you'll soon learn that there are places where you'd probably rather not linger. Haunted tours in Edinburgh frequent locations such as Greyfriars Kirkyard, famous for the Black Mausoleum, while stories of real-life characters William Burke and William Hare add flavour to the foreboding atmosphere. The pair are notorious criminals that killed 16 people between 1827 and 1829 until Burke's public execution. An additional history of plague, pestilence, and violent criminal activity are enough to convince many visitors that the town is indeed haunted, though if any location is legitimately going to make your skin crawl, it's Edinburgh Dungeon, though you can now expect live actors to act out the horrors that were happening there long ago. Goldfield and Edinburgh have made their spooky atmospheres family-friendly, but in Talinga, Texas, the location is a little closer to what you might think of as a real ghost town. There are still various amenities and even luxury glamping options, but the remaining population of 78 relies on tourism, and they market the area as a true American ghost town experience. The town itself has a long and interesting history, but what sets Talinga apart from Goldfield is that it operated into the 40s, making this more a World War II era ghost town as opposed to a Western-themed attraction. The town is, to put it as politely as possible, a bleak remnant of a small mining town, and the tourists that bleed down from Big Bend National Park are mostly adventurers. The biggest claim to fame of the ghost town is that it was used as a shooting location for the 1993 TV movie Rio Diablo and was featured in the National Geographic show Badlands, Texas, which focused on the real-life local murder of Glenn Phelps. Moving on to a location that is enough to give just about anybody the chills, a small island located between Venice and Lido in the Venetian Lagoon is a ghost hunter's dream come true. At first glance, the small island doesn't look like anything special, perhaps just a little dilapidated. But the more you learn about Paviglia, the more you understand why it's rumored to be one of the most haunted places on Earth. It turns out that the island was once a quarantine station for incoming ships, specifically between 1793 and 1814. During that time, it's rumored that at least 100,000 people died from various illnesses, only to be dumped unceremoniously into unmarked pits. If you think this is an exaggeration, the information comes from National Geographic, which investigated and confirmed mass graves. Following the area being a quarantine station, the island was transformed into a nursing home in 1922, which lasted until 1968. There is honestly nothing too spooky about this era, and the island is referred to in the 1961 book The Lagoon of Venice, its island's life and communications, as being rather pleasant. Even still, the island has been mostly abandoned since, and its reputation for disembodied voices and unusual occurrences has only grown stronger with each passing year. Presently, only caretakers occupy the island, and efforts to transform the small strip of land are ongoing to this day. After a long and complicated series of auctions and attempts to avoid privatization, it seems that the island is currently under a 6-year concession to implement an urban lagoon park project, ghosts or otherwise. But you could forget about glamping if you visit the 16th century Bangarh Fort located in Rajasthan state in India. Locals legitimately seem to believe that the incredibly well-preserved fort is cursed, and instead of luring tourists with spooky tales and gaudy attractions, visitors aren't even permitted in after a certain time. The fort was built during the rule of Raja Bhagwan Das as the residence of his second son, Madho Singh, and the many legends and stories are certainly fascinating. It's said that a sadhu named Guru Balunath, a holy person that renounced worldly life, lived near the fort, declaring that if any structure was taller than his, or if any shadow fell on his house, the town would be destroyed. On a particular occasion, when columns were added to the fort, a shadow touched the sadhu's house, and the fort and surrounding town were forever cursed. Another story tells of a black magic priest that fell in love with a Bengal princess, Ratnavati. The priest offered her a love potion in the market one day, but she rejected it, throwing the potion against a large rock. The rock allegedly rolled onto the priest, crushing him to death, but before he died, he cursed the village to desolation and destruction. Whatever your feelings toward the idea of a curse, stories of the fort being haunted are rampant, and a warning has indeed been put up by the Archaeological Survey of India. The sign says that those visiting after sunset would be prosecuted, allegedly as a way to declare the fort legally haunted. This obviously isn't true. For one, hauntings aren't real, but the sign is simply a way to keep trespassers out after dark. But it hasn't stopped some from saying that the Indian government is afraid of guests being attacked by ghosts. Now, you're probably able to hand-wave the other haunted locations away as nothing but superstition and silly stories. Indeed. But Port Arthur, Tasmania truly does have a reputation that will make your blood run rather cold. The port is a former convict settlement, once part of 11 penal sites built by the British Empire during the 18th and 19th centuries. The locations are today World Heritage Sites, described as, quote, the best surviving examples of large-scale convict transportation and the colonial expansion of European powers through the presence of labour and convicts, end quote. At a glance, Port Arthur seems to be just an old but rather majestic building, but the stories and real-life history are more than a bit unsettling, starting with the original penal colony being characterized by extreme isolation. Prisoners went to great lengths, often resulting in their deaths, and of the estimated 1,646 graves, most unmarked, only 180 belonged to prison staff. The location closed as a penal colony in 1877, and what followed was an extensive effort to turn the location into some sort of tourist attraction. Despite having been designed for prisoners, the penal colony was and still is incredibly beautiful. The port changed hands a few times over the decades that followed, but the location remained popular primarily due to the rumors of hauntings. Most of the prison buildings were eventually torn down, and the town of Carnarvon blossomed in their place, with hopes being that the perception would finally shift towards something positive. But despite these desperate measures, the prison structures that remained were still the primary draw. Hopes of creating a holiday town were further dashed by popular books such as For the Term of His Natural Life by Marcus Clarke and The Broad Arrow by Caroline Leakey, both of which focused on the penal colony's disturbing past. By the early 1900s, Carnarvon was simply reverted back to being Port Arthur, given that it was clear that the ghost stories were going to be primarily the means of drawing in tourism. Then in 1996, Port Arthur would again live up to its reputation as a horrible place, but certainly not because of ghostly stories. The massacre that occurred there is the worst in Australia's history and one of the worst in world history, and it involved 29-year-old Martin Bryant. For reasons that are still unclear, Bryant murdered 35 people and wounded 18 more, and part of the killing spree occurred at the Port Arthur tourist attraction. He was captured soon after and is currently serving 35 life sentences in the psychiatric wing of Risdon Prison in Hobart, Tasmania. The event initially all but ended tourism in Port Arthur in the short term, but after reopening with a focus on remembrance and overcoming trauma, the location is once again popular. Having officially moved into truly dark territory, we end our list today with areas that are some of the most dangerous in the world, not because of climate or ghosts, but because of overwhelming crime and violence. Lovely. Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, was originally a center of trade, later becoming a prime objective for conquest by Imperial Japanese forces during World War II. Today, the port of nearly 400,000 is marked as one of the most crime-ridden and dangerous in the world, terrorized by rascal gangs who frequently commit opportunistic crimes. The city is also plagued by inadequate infrastructure and high levels of unemployment and poverty, resulting in theft and assault being a common occurrence. Despite this, Papua New Guinea itself is still popular with tourists, offering a diverse landscape and providing adventure experiences like diving, trekking, and bungee jumping. Tourists are encouraged to avoid high-crime areas like Port Moresby and stick to areas intended for visitors. Moving from bad to worse, San Pedro Sula, Honduras is likewise known as amongst the most violent cities in the world. Also ravaged by gang violence and known to be a center for drug trafficking, murder, robberies and carjackings are just a daily occurrence. The situation is made dramatically worse by a police force well known for corruption, and many officers simply don't respond to calls for help due to being on gang payrolls. Again, Honduras itself is actually an incredibly popular tourist destination, visited primarily for its beaches, coral reefs, rainforests and awe-inspiring Mayan ruins. If visiting, avoid the high crime areas and stick to established tourism destinations, okay? Don't get murdered. Now, it's safe to say that parts of Papua New Guinea and Honduras have rough reputations, but in the case of Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, you're unlikely to even fly over the region due to a constant risk of attack by anti-aircraft weaponry. This certainly isn't the video to go into the civil war unfolding in Sudan, but the short version is that law and order have completely collapsed in some regions, large swaths of land are known to be riddled with undocumented landmines, and anyone that even looks like a foreigner may just be attacked without warning. Travel guides simply say that if you find yourself somehow in Khartoum, head to the nearest embassy immediately and leave as quickly as possible. And last on our list of 50 today, it is, frankly, difficult to even properly describe the truly unbearable conditions in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. Starting with the First Congo War in 1996, followed by the Second Congo War in 1998, it's estimated that the ongoing humanitarian disaster has impacted around 3 million. Violence of war is ongoing to this day, with widespread disease, famine, and poverty. Most government services, including medical facilities, have all but been completely disrupted. The situation has only been made worse by the presence of some of the largest reserves of rare metals in the world, including cobalt, copper, and uranium. The valuable resources have incentivized foreign nations to get involved, primarily China, but there has not been much of a positive overall improvement. We don't have nearly enough time to properly explore the situation, so although it's a rather dark note to end this video on, we'll simply share some quotes from those that have witnessed the conditions in the Eastern Congo firsthand, quoting, "It is more dangerous to be a woman than to be a soldier right now." That's from Major General Patrick Camard, former UN Deputy Force Commander. Quoting again, "In the Congo, if someone starts an armed group or kills people, they have a better chance of becoming a senior minister or a general rather than being put behind bars." That's Aniki van Woudenberg from Human Rights Watch. Another quote, "I was not trained as a gynecologist, but I'm being trained on the job because the need at the hospital is so large. The Congolese government does not provide a hospital with any resources." And that's from Dr. Roger Lahariri in Panzi Hospital. And on that rather depressing note, that's the end of our rather long video. Thank you for being here.